Greetings and welcome back to Route 303 AP English and the World of Ideas lectures. This is lecture number 37, Intro to Unit Part number 7, that Jacobus calls faith. Now, our assumptions is that you've been following our stuff at Learn Strong, lectures 1 through 7, Unit 1, Treatment of Government. We met Lao Tzu there, as well as Machiavelli and Jefferson's Declaration of Independence. Lectures 8 through 12, Unit 2, that was justice, the topic, and we messed around with a number of writers, among them Douglas, Thoreau, and King's letter from a Birmingham jail. Lectures 13 through 17 was our Unit 3 in wealth, and here we met Smith, as well as Marx and a number of other thinkers. Lectures 18 through 24, that was our unit on mind. That was unit number 4. We studied our Plato, our Freud, our Jung, and a number of other thinkers as well. Lectures 25 through 30 was Unit 6. Jacob has called it Nature. We saw our Bacon there, our Darwin there, our Dawkins there, and any number of others. Kaku is there. And then lectures 31 through 36 was unit number 6 for us, and that one was Culture. Here we met our Herodotus, our Devaka, our Margaret Mead, Ruth Benedict, and others, right? Gertz was there. And now it's time for us to turn to unit number 7, that Jacobus calls faith. Now, we've always begun these introductions with references to Mortimer Adler's Syntopicon, that great collection of 102 great ideas and all of that. Faith is not one of them for Adler. He has other kinds of words like religion and others. Belief is also not a topic. And I think the reason is because for Adler, this topic, faith, is a very, very broad one. But I think for Jacobus, he wanted it to be a very general topic. Now we're going to turn to Jacobus. We're going to actively read, annotate these paragraphs, just like we have done for the earlier parts. And of course, we can already point out that, notice, Jacobus began this volume with Lao Tzu and the Tao Te Ching. So we're going to pick up a number of other important religious and religious thinkers and texts. Let's go ahead now. I'm with you on page 564. Let's just read and enjoy the prose of Jacobus. He, of course, is a brilliant writer in his own right. Faith, he says, is one of the most compelling and enduring ideas the world has known. Some of the earliest prehistoric artifacts show evidence of belief in a higher power or powers that shape the course of human events, and archaeological digs have revealed the materials of religious practice and of worship of deities spanning thousands of years. The great Aliadi comes to mind as maybe a thinker that you want to look at as one of those that you might reference for this kind of conversation. Although much of the history of faith is lost to the eons of prehistory, we know that during the last 6,000 or 7,000 years of humanity's development, faith has grown and changed as other human ideas and institutions have grown and changed. The earliest evidence suggests that nature worship was common among people all over the globe, often centering on variations on sun worshiping. We think about the Egyptians, the Babylonians. Animism, the belief that all things in nature have a spiritual force and must be respected. We think of the Greeks, don't we? And in some cases, worship or deferred to thrived in ancient times and continues to be practiced to this day. The pantheon of gods that the Egyptians developed and recorded, doubtless from earlier vestiges of their prehistory, are identified by Herodotus. We saw Herodotus in an earlier lecture as the precursors of some of the Greek gods that are familiar to us through myth. And again, we have defined in 303 the use of the word myth, stories to explain the unexplainable, correct? The Greek and the Roman myths center on Zeus and Jupiter, but pay tribute to a range of gods with specialized responsibilities. LearnStrong.net has a number of lectures on Greek and Roman mythology. Of course, we have said we are the stories we tell, the stories we retell, the stories we accept, the stories we reject. And to that degree, of course, we would say that these stories are hypercritical to our understanding our culture. The rise of monotheism is evident in many cultures, but for Westerners, its earliest development centers most prominently in Judaism. The development of monotheism has been seen as evolutionary. We can think about the work of Jordan Peterson as one classic exemplar of that. But the term evolution is a metaphor in this case. There's no objective means of establishing progress in matters of faith. Herodotus, Plato, Aristotle, of course we're going to see Aristotle in the last Unit 8. We see the other two already. were what modern theologians would call pagans and based their faith, insofar as faith can be identified in any of them, on the polytheism of their time, right? Later thinkers, such as St. Matthew, absorbed the contemporary revolution of monotheistic thought. Identifying human figures with the Godhead occurred relatively late in the development of religious faith. The Buddha, Jesus, and Krishna represent important human figures for the religious systems of which they are a part. The idea of their humanity is one of their most important contributions to modern religious faith. The selections that follow are drawn from several different religions and approaches to the concept of faith. However, the idea that faith transforms the individual is constant in these selections. I'll read that again. The idea that faith transforms the individual is constant in these selections. Some emphasize that change comes from within and that individuals must work at becoming worthy of their faith. Discipline is another common theme among these writers, but it takes several forms and is not always clearly related to moral behavior. In fact, morality, or right action in one's relations with others, is not always central to these writers, although we can infer that it is usually present. Their focus is clearly on making the individual worthy and spiritually unencumbered. The range of behavior in matters of faith is extraordinary in these selections. The Buddha recommends using self-control and meditation to achieve enlightenment. St. Matthew describes the path that Jesus set out for the disciples, emphasizing mercy and charity, or love. The Lord Krishna tells Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita that only through discipline and a renouncing of the senses will he know the divinity. The Prophet Muhammad holds a dialogue with Allah concerning the fate of believers and non-believers. Saint Teresa of Avila, one of the most influential and inspiring of modern mystics, describes visions of rapturous encounters with Jesus and several angels. Friedrich Nietzsche describes aspects of religious faith as practiced by the ancient Greeks and Romans, ranging from cerebral and controlled Apollonian expressions of faith to ecstatic Dionysian effusions. So go back to our lecture, of course, with Ruth Benedict, where we were already introducing Nietzsche's views of Apollonianism and Dionysianism. Martin Buber continues the theme of dialogue in I and Thou, when he holds that God is the ultimate thou in human relationships. Now we're going to turn specifically to each of the readings. Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, directs our attention inward to the deepest spiritual resources of the individual. According to the Buddha, meditation is the path to enlightenment, revealing a spiritual life that follows an eightfold path and eventually provides the soul with peace. The Buddha provides instructions in how to control the senses, how to moderate the appetites, how to control the wandering mind through focus and concentration. We're familiar with the concept of monkey mind in 303. Following the Eightfold Path requires right behavior, which can be achieved only by gaining knowledge of what right behavior is. St. Matthew's Gospel can be found in the New Testament of the Bible. It tells the story of Jesus' youth and brief ministry. In the Sermon on the Mount, the selection that appears here, Jesus instructs his disciples, beginning with the Beatitudes, the blessings that the disciples enjoy as a result of their having faith in Jesus. The Sermon on the Mount focuses on interpretation of the laws, including the subjects of adultery, divorce, vengeance, charity. It ends with the Lord's Prayer, which Jesus says is the only prayer one needs, since it includes all prayers. The core of the selection focuses on the morality of the individual and daily behavior and an understanding of the spirit of the law. The Bhagavad Gita presents a portrait of the Hindu divinity, Lord Krishna, who in the guise of Arjuna's charioteer advises Arjuna on matters of faith. He reveals himself to Arjuna and describes his two selves, the natural self, which is the material of all nature, and the spiritual self, which is the ineffable divinity. Like the Buddha, Lord Krishna emphasizes the role of meditation in seeking enlightenment. For the Hindu, enlightenment involves reaching the end of the indefinite number of incarnations that the individual soul must pass through before reaching nirvana, the point of ultimate oneness with the divine. The path involves self-discipline and a withdrawal from the distractions of the sensory world. The believer, from the Quran, presents a dialogue between Allah and the Prophet Muhammad, a structure similar to that used in the excerpts from St. Matthew and the Bhagavad Gita. The angel Gabriel reveals the word of Allah to Muhammad. In The Believer, Muhammad compares the fate of those who believe in Allah with that of unbelievers. According to Muhammad, believers will enter into paradise while unbelievers will be lost. The Believer moves from discussing the fate of the unfaithful to a review of biblical history, to the story of the Egyptian Pharaoh and others who bring destruction upon themselves by refusing to believe in Allah. Saint Teresa of Avila was a 16th century nun who founded a number of Carmelite convents in an effort to help reform the Carmelite order. She was a woman of action and a manager of daily business affairs, but she was also a powerfully magnetic personality whose faith was unusually passionate and strong. She describes in this selection a series of visions that reveal to her the human nature of God. Her fervor convinced highly skeptical members of the Spanish Inquisition that the visions were genuine and that Teresa's faith existed on a level that few could ever know. Although Friedrich Nietzsche is famous for saying in 1899 that God is dead in the famous Madman passage, which we've given a lecture on in learnstrong.net, he was nevertheless deeply interested in faith and religion in their many manifestations. In Apollonianism and Dionysianism, he describes two polarities in religious behavior as they were understood by both the ancients and his contemporaries. Nietzsche seems to have leaned toward approving the divine madness of the Dionysian spirit, but he realized that both paths, the thoughtful, restrained Apollonian and the ecstatic, feverish Dionysian, exist and both serve the purposes of faith. Finally, Martin Buber, among the most important modern Jewish thinkers, was influenced by Nietzsche and is sometimes described as an existentialist. Existentialists emphasize our daily actions, our existence, as a measure of who we are. Buber uses the term actualize to describe the process by which the individual realizes the fullness of the life experience. The excerpt included here from I and Thou, like St. Matthew's and Muhammad's, focuses on the individual's dialogue with God. For Buber, God is the eternal Thou who helps us actualize ourselves. As he tells us, we as individuals realize ourselves in relationship to others, and the primary other for everyone is God. These expressions of faith from 7, and by the way, more readings in this unit than in any of the other units, these expressions of faith from 7 very different points of view demonstrate only a small portion of the variety of experience encompassed by human faith. Religions are complex structures of belief, demanding a special commitment from their members. Some of the attitudes and expressions of faith in this section may seem arbitrary, extreme, or even unbelievable. Yet they are the basic materials of any inquiry into the relationship between human beings and the divine. Now, go back to the very early lectures that we gave at the beginning of our conversations together, especially our treatment of Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching. There I made some observations about introductions to studies of religion. I made the observation there, what I will say again here. There's 2 ways to approach the study of any religious faith. One is the apologetic approach. That is to say, what's right or what's wrong with any position that one is studying. That is to say, what's right or wrong with Buddhism, what's right or wrong with Christianity, what's right or wrong with Islam. That is an apologetic approach. There was a second approach, and it's the one we will be taking here, and it's what we call the non-apologetic approach. Here, we are not looking to talk about what's right or what's wrong with these faiths that are represented, but rather, not apologetically, we are looking simply to understand them in some way. We used Houston Smith and his classic Religions of the World as our operational guide. No question, Smith in 303 for us has always served as our model. We're not interested in becoming Buddhists or Muslims or Christians or Hindus or whatever. We're interested in what it is that these faiths profess, believe, and practice. We will study some essays to get a sense of that. And as well, of course, we'll look at writers like Nietzsche and Martin Buber to as well be challenged to think about thinking and believing and why anybody does it in the first place at all. I welcome you now to the Unit 7. We're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to have some challenging ideas presented to us. Let's go to work.